What Adam did that afternoon would stay in Richard's heart forever. A single act of kindness, so small, so ordinary, yet had the power to break through the walls around a lonely man's soul. A tired boy, barely 10, with shoes worn thin, and a lunchbox that carried just enough food for one. And across from him, a stranger, a man who looked hungry, forgotten, invisible to everyone else passing by. Most children rushed home. Some laughed. Some didn't even notice. But Adam, he stopped. He hesitated for a moment. Then quietly, almost shyly, opened his little lunchbox and offered half of the very little he had. And in that moment, without knowing it, he gave away more than bread. He gave away warmth. He gave away dignity. He gave away love. What Adam didn't know was that the man sitting there in torn clothes wasn't just anyone. He wasn't truly penniless. He wasn't truly alone. He was Richard James, one of the wealthiest men in the city. And that small act of kindness would begin a story neither of them could ever forget. But before we go any further, tell me, where are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know. Because as this story unfolds, you'll see how a billionaire, hidden behind shabby clothes, found the one thing all his wealth could never buy. That afternoon, the school bell rang, and children poured out of gates, their laughter filling the street. Most of them ran toward the waiting arms of parents, or toward the shops nearby, eager for snacks. But sitting quietly under the shade of a broken wall was a man in tattered clothes, his face hidden behind an old cap, his shoes worn thin. To everyone else, he looked like nothing more than a beggar, someone invisible, someone unimportant. Most children passed without so much as a glance. Some even snickered under their breath. To them, he was just another poor man on the street. But one boy stopped. His name was Adam. Adam wasn't like the other kids. His shoes were scuffed, his backpack frayed, and in his hand was a tiny lunchbox, the same one he had carried for years. Inside, he only had half a sandwich left. His mother had packed it with care, though they barely had enough to share between them. For Adam, that sandwich was his entire meal for the rest of the day. Yet, when he saw the man sitting there, head lowered, stomach growling, quietly, something tugged at his heart. Adam hesitated. He looked at his small sandwich, then at the man. For a moment, you could almost see the battle in his eyes, a hungry boy deciding between keeping what little he had or giving it away. And then he walked closer. Without saying much, Adam quietly unwrapped the sandwich, broke in half, and placed one piece gently into the man's trembling hands. His voice was soft, almost shy, but filled with sincerity. "Here, you can have this. It's not much, but maybe it will help." Richard, though Adam didn't know that was his real name, lifted his eyes, and in that moment, the billionaire disguised as a beggar felt something he hadn't felt in years, kindness that expected nothing in return. His throat tightened, his eyes watered. For the first time in a very long time, he felt seen. Adam gave a small smile, shrugged, and walked away, as if what he had done was no big deal. But for Richard, sitting there with half a sandwich in his hand, it was everything. That single act of generosity from a poor boy who had so little would stay with him forever. Richard James was not who he seemed to the world. He was a name whispered with awe, a billionaire whose fortune stretched across industries, a man who lived in towering glass offices and drove cars that gleamed like jewels. His signature could move markets, and his wealth was spoken of like legend. And yet, in that moment, sitting outside a crumbling school wall in shabby clothes, none of that mattered. His wealth, his empire, his status, all hidden behind the dust on his face and the torn fabric of a borrowed coat. To the children who passed by, he was just another poor man, invisible, forgotten. And that's exactly what he wanted. Because Richard wasn't there to be recognized. He wasn't looking for fame or respect or even sympathy. He was searching for something his billions had never given him. Something simple, something real. Behind the disguise, Richard carried a loneliness that no money could cure. His mansion was filled with art and marble, but silent. His long dining table sat empty, night after night. He had friends in high places, but none who truly saw him. Not as Richard the billionaire, not as a man, just him. And so he hid himself in rags, choosing to sit among strangers. When Adam had offered him half of that small sandwich, Richard's heart had nearly broken. That boy, with nothing but a tired lunchbox and a hopeful smile, had given more than any business partner, more than any socialite ever had. It was raw, honest, pure, and in that moment, Richard realized his disguise had done its job. For the first time in years, someone had shown him kindness, not for his money, not for his name, but for the simple reason that it was the right thing to do. What Adam didn't know was that the man he had helped wasn't some wandering beggar. He was one of the wealthiest men in the country, a man who could buy entire streets, yet sat hungry outside of school, waiting, almost hoping someone would notice. And that someone had been Adam. That secret, Richard knew he would keep it, at least for now, because sometimes the truth can wait. Sometimes it's better to listen, to feel, and to learn before revealing who you really are. The next day, Richard returned to the school wall. Same spot, same disguise. And there he was again, Adam, carrying that old lunchbox, worn at the edges, but held with care. At first, Adam only offered a smile, a small wave, almost shy. But soon, that small gesture turned into conversation. "Did you eat today?" Adam asked, holding up his lunch. His tone was gentle, almost protective, like he was the older one. Richard chuckled softly. "Not yet," he whispered. And once again, Adam unwrapped his lunch and split in half. A sandwich, a piece of fruit, sometimes just a small roll. Nothing fancy, nothing much. But to Richard, it tasted like the finest meal he'd ever had. Because it wasn't the food that filled him, it was the kindness, the warmth, the honesty of a boy who had so little, yet gave so much. Day after day, this little ritual repeated. Adam would sit by his side, talking about the simplest things, his classes, his favorite subject, the way he dreamed of becoming someone important one day. Sometimes he laughed about his shoes, too tight now because his mother couldn't afford new ones. Sometimes his voice dropped when he mentioned her working late into the night, just to keep the lights on. And Richard listened, truly listened. For once in his life, someone wasn't talking to him for deals or money or power. They were just talking about life, about dreams, about small joys. Every afternoon became a moment Richard looked forward to. The long, empty halls of his mansion felt even colder now, because outside that school wall, he had found warmth. He had found a friend. Sometimes, Adam would offer jokes, silly, childlike ones that made Richard laugh in a way he hadn't in years. Other times, Adam would ask deep, innocent questions like, "Do you think rich people are happier than poor people?" Richard would pause, the weight of his hidden truth pressing heavy in his chest, before softly replying, "Not always." And Adam believed him. Because to Adam, this man wasn't rich or poor. He was simply someone who listened, someone who cared. Each passing day stitched a thread between them, tiny, invisible threads of trust and affection. What began as a boy sharing half a sandwich was slowly turning into something far greater. Neither of them said out loud, but they were no longer strangers. They were becoming something closer, something that felt a lot like family. That evening, Richard returned to his mansion. The gates swung open, tall and grand but silent. Inside, the marble floors echoed with his footsteps, each sound bouncing off the empty walls. The chandeliers glittered above, but their light felt cold, almost distant, like stars too far away to ever give warmth. He passed the dining hall, where a table that could seat 20 stood untouched. Rows of silverware, polished and perfect, but no laughter, no clinking of glasses, no voices to fill the space. Just silence, always silence. He sat at the head of the table, as he always did. One plate, one glass, dinner prepared by staff, served neatly, beautifully, but tasteless. Because food, no matter how rich, means nothing when eaten alone. That night, even the air felt heavy. The mansion had everything: gold frames, expensive art, velvet curtains, endless rooms. Yet it lacked the one thing money could never buy: warmth. And Richard felt it. He felt the emptiness pressing against him like a weight he could no longer ignore. But the very next afternoon, when Adam invited him over, the world shifted. Adam's house was nothing like the mansion. The walls were old, the paint chipped in places, the furniture simple and worn from years of use. The kitchen table wobbled slightly when you leaned on it, and the curtains by the window had been stitched back together more than once. But the moment Richard stepped inside, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: life. The smell of bread baking drifted through the air, carrying comfort with it. Adam's mother greeted him with a tired smile, her hands rough from work but gentle when she set down bowls on the table. The living room had laughter in its corners, the kind that lingers, the kind that doesn't need wealth to survive. When they sat for dinner, the food was simple: rice, beans, a bit of stew, nothing extravagant. But Richard couldn't remember a meal that tasted so good. Because as they ate, Adam talked with excitement. His mother laughed softly, and Richard felt like he belonged. He glanced around at the mismatched chairs, the flickering light bulb overhead, the cracks in the walls. And for the first time, he thought, this is what a home feels like. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about space or beauty. It was about love, about care, about being seen. And as Richard looked at Adam's family, humble, struggling, yet filled with warmth, he realized something painful. His mansion would never feel like this, not unless he changed the way he lived. Richard lay awake in his enormous bedroom that night. The chandelier above him glistened softly. The golden wallpaper shimmered faintly under the lamp, but none of it mattered. For the first time in years, his heart felt unsettled. Not from business, not from loneliness, but from what he had seen inside Adam's little home. The cracked walls, the patched curtains, the way Adam's mother tried to hide her weariness behind a smile. It all replayed in Richard's mind, again and again. He remembered the dinner table, the simple meal they had shared, and then how Adam had carefully pushed the bigger portion of stew toward his mother, pretending not to notice when she gave hers back to him. That tiny exchange said more than words ever could. Richard turned on his side, restless. For the first time in years, his fortune felt useless. What good were millions sitting in banks when right across town, a boy with a heart of gold was growing up in scarcity? The very next morning, Richard made a decision, quietly, without telling Adam. He called one of his trusted men, handed him an envelope filled with bills, and whispered strict instructions. Don't let them know it's from me. Just make sure their rent is paid, their pantry stocked, and if repairs are needed, handle it quietly. The man nodded, but Richard wasn't done. This wasn't just charity, it was gratitude. He owed Adam something greater than money. He owed him dignity. And so, little by little, changes began to appear in Adam's home. One morning, Adam's mother found the landlord unusually cheerful. For the first time in months, he wasn't banging on the door, demanding rent. Instead, he tipped his hat politely and walked away. She stood there confused, clutching the broom in her hand, whispering, "What just happened?" Another week passed, and a delivery truck showed up with groceries. Bags of rice, fresh vegetables, even fruits they hadn't seen in weeks. Adam's mother looked at the labels. Puzzled, there was no note, no explanation. Just food, as though some invisible hand had decided to care. Then came the day when Adam noticed new glass panes fitted into their broken window. The landlord muttered something about a repairman making rounds, but Adam wasn't convinced. He was smart, sharper than he looked. He felt someone was watching over them. But who? Meanwhile, Richard stayed silent. Every evening, he sat in his grand study, sipping his tea, imagining the relief on their faces when the groceries arrived, or the way Adam's mother must have sighed when the rent collector stopped knocking. That image gave him peace in a way nothing else ever had. But he also felt a sting, because no matter how much he gave, he couldn't buy what Adam already had. That warm laughter, that unshakable bond between mother and son. One evening, Adam's mother folded her hands and whispered prayer out loud. "Whoever you are, thank you. God bless you." Richard wasn't there to hear it, but somehow he felt it deep inside, as though kindness, once planted, always found its way back to the giver. And so, in secret, Richard kept giving. Quietly, patiently, hoping that maybe one day Adam would understand not just what he had done, but why. Because for Richard, this wasn't about charity. It was about love, and about a boy who had unknowingly reminded him what family truly meant. Days slowly turned into weeks, and with every passing moment, something remarkable began to happen between Richard and Adam. At first, their meetings were simple. A man and a boy sitting together on a park bench, sharing stories about school or about business, or sometimes about nothing at all. But even in silence, there was comfort, a quiet understanding, as if life had tied them together long before they ever met. Adam would rush toward Richard the moment he saw him, his small footsteps echoing with joy. "Guess what happened today?" he'd say, holding out a drawing from school or a small rock he thought looked special. And Richard, this man who had once sat in boardrooms filled with power and pride, would bend down, listening as if every word Adam spoke was the most important thing he had ever heard. For Richard, the world had always been about numbers, deals, contracts, endless meetings inside tall glass towers. But Adam pulled him into a world he had long forgotten, a world of simple joys, of scraped knees, paper airplanes, and laughter that didn't need a reason. One afternoon, Adam convinced Richard to play soccer with him in the park. At first, Richard resisted. "I'm far too old for this," he chuckled, shaking his head. But the sparkle in Adam's eyes was impossible to refuse. Minutes later, the two of them were running across the grass. Richard, in his polished shoes and pressed shirt, stumbling and laughing as Adam skillfully dribbled the ball around him. People passing by couldn't help but smile at the sight. A boy teaching a grown man how to play, both laughing as though nothing else in the world mattered. That day, when Richard collapsed on the grass, out of breath, Adam plopped down beside him. "You're not so bad," Adam teased, handing him a bottle of water. Richard laughed, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "You think so?" "I felt like I was chasing the wind." "But you didn't give up," Adam said softly. "That's what makes you good." Richard froze at those words. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Not as a businessman, not as a billionaire, not as a man people feared or respected, but as the father, a man who was learning again what it meant to be human. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept hearing Adam's laughter in his ears, kept seeing the way the boy's eyes lit up whenever he accomplished something small. For years, Richard had lived surrounded by luxury, but it had all been silent, empty, cold. Now, for the first time, his life had sound again, laughter, footsteps, the innocent questions of a child. Adam began to invite Richard to his home more often. His mother noticed. Of course. She saw the way Richard's eyes softened around her son, the way Adam looked at him not as a stranger anymore, but as someone safe, someone who cared. And slowly, the boy who had once been hungry for affection began to find it in Richard. He would lean against him when tired. He would hold his hand when crossing the street. And every time he did, Richard's chest tightened with a feeling he thought he had lost forever. It was not pity. It was not guilt. It was love, a father's love, the kind Richard had never thought he could give, but now couldn't imagine living without. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, Adam said something that nearly broke Richard. "You know, sometimes I pretend you're my dad." The words were innocent, whispered without hesitation, but they struck Richard like thunder. His throat tightened, his eyes burned, and for the first time in years, he had to turn away quickly so Adam wouldn't see the tears gathering there. In that moment, Richard knew this boy wasn't just a friend anymore. He wasn't just someone he was helping in secret. Adam had become the son he never had, and Richard had become the father Adam had always dreamed of. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day when the sun was gentle, the streets were alive, and nothing seemed out of place. Adam had been waiting at their usual bench, his backpack at his side, swinging his legs restlessly. He didn't know Richard was running late. He didn't know fate was preparing to pull the curtain away from the secret Richard had worked so hard to protect. Because that was the day Adam discovered who Richard really was. Richard arrived in a car Adam had never seen before. Not just any car, sleek, black, polished to perfection. The kind of car that didn't belong on their modest street. The driver, dressed in a suit, quickly opened the door, bowing slightly as Richard stepped out. Adam blinked in confusion. He had always seen Richard as someone simple, a man who wore nice clothes, sure, but never this. "Mr. Richard?" he asked, his small voice filled with curiosity. Richard froze. His heart skipped. He hadn't wanted this moment to happen. Not yet, maybe not ever. Before Richard could answer, a group of men came walking toward him, carrying folders, talking quickly about stocks, investments, meetings. They bowed their heads respectfully, waiting for Richard's approval before speaking further. Adam just stared. This wasn't the man who played soccer in the park. This wasn't the man who listened to his stories and laughed at his jokes. This was someone else. Adam's mother stepped outside, her grocery bag in hand. She stopped in her tracks when she saw the scene. Richard standing tall, his secret life spilling into the street. For a moment, her lips parted, but no words came out. She had suspected he wasn't ordinary. But this was more than she ever imagined. Adam's voice broke the silence. Why are they calling you sir?" His tone wasn't playful. It wasn't curious. It was trembling. Richard stepped forward, his hands slightly raised as though trying to calm a frightened bird. "Adam, I wanted to tell you. I wanted to explain, but you lied to me." The words cut through the air, sharper than any blade. Richard's chest tightened. "I never lied," he whispered. "I just didn't tell you everything." But Adam's small fist clenched, his eyes brimming with tears. "You said we were the same. You sat with me. You played with me. You let me believe you were just you, not some rich man with cars and drivers and people bowing to you." The more Adam spoke, the more his voice cracked, as though each word weighed too heavy for his little heart. The boy's mother stepped closer, gently touching his shoulder. "Adam, sweetheart." But Adam shook his head, pulling away. His trust had been cracked open. He looked up at Richard, not with admiration anymore, but with betrayal. Richard dropped to one knee, lowering himself at Adam's height. His hands trembled as he reached forward. "Adam, the man you know, the one who sat on this bench, who kicked the ball with you, who laughed at your stories. That was me. That's still me. My money doesn't change that." But Adam's tears finally spilled. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide?" His voice broke, softer now but full of pain. "Did you think I wouldn't like you if I knew?" Richard's throat tightened so much he could barely breathe. He wanted to explain, to say that he had been afraid, that he didn't want to be loved for his wealth, but for who he was inside, that for once in his life, he wanted to be seen not as a billionaire, not as a name in the papers, but as Richard, just Richard. But to a child, those reasons felt like excuses. The silence between them grew heavy. The driver and businessmen awkwardly stepped back, lowering their eyes, realizing they were intruding on something sacred. Finally, Adam took a shaky breath and whispered words Richard would never forget. "I thought you were my dad, but you're not. You're just another rich man who pretended to care." It was a knife through Richard's heart. He flinched, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. For years he had lived untouched by pain. Yet here, a boy's words brought him to his knees. Adam turned, running into his mother's arms. She held him tightly, whispering soft comforts, her eyes meeting Richard's with a mixture of sorrow and disappointment. Richard remained on his knees, frozen, watching the boy who had given his life meaning slip away from him. And in that moment, the man who had everything realized he might have just lost the only thing that truly mattered. For days, the park felt empty. The bench stood silent. The grass swayed in the wind, untouched by little shoes running across it. And Richard sat there anyway, every evening, waiting. But Adam didn't come. The boy's mother had seen the way her son's heart cracked open that day. He cried himself to sleep, clutching the little drawing he once made of him and Richard playing soccer. She wanted to ease his pain, but she couldn't deny it. Richard should have told the truth. Meanwhile, Richard was drowning in guilt. He replayed that moment over and over. Adam's voice trembling. "I thought you were my dad, but you're not. You're just another rich man who pretended to care." Those words haunted him because they weren't true. He had cared. He had cared more than he ever thought possible. But how do you prove love to a child who feels betrayed? One late evening, the mother found Richard waiting again. His suit jacket was folded beside him, sleeves rolled up like he was trying to strip away every layer of wealth and show only the man inside. His eyes were tired, heavy, but when he saw her, they softened. "Please," Richard whispered, his voice almost breaking. "Let me talk to him. Just once. I don't want him to grow up thinking I lied to him, that I didn't care." The mother studied him. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the kind of sincerity you can't buy with money. After a long pause, she finally nodded. "Tomorrow, at home, but only if he agrees to listen." Richard's chest tightened with a fragile hope. The next day, Richard stood outside their modest home, holding nothing in his hands. No gifts, no distractions, just himself. When Adam opened the door, his little face hardened instantly. He tried to close it, but Richard gently held it with his hand. "Adam, please, 5 minutes. If you never want to see me again after that, I'll walk away." The boy hesitated. His small fingers gripped the doorframe. He wanted to slam it shut, to push Richard out of his life. But his heart, still bruised, wanted answers too. So he let him in. Inside, Richard sat on the edge of the couch. Adam stood far away, arms crossed, his jaw trembling like he was trying not to cry. "I'm not going to make excuses," Richard began softly. His voice wasn't the confident one Adam knew. It was raw, human, fragile. "I should have told you the truth sooner. I was afraid, Adam, afraid that if you knew who I was, you'd look at me the way everyone else does. Not as a friend, not as family, but as a rich man, as a name, as something untouchable." He paused, his eyes burning. "But when I was with you, I wasn't any of that. I was just me, just a man who wanted to sit on a bench with a boy who made him laugh, who made him feel alive again, who made him remember what it means to love." Adam's throat tightened. His lip quivered, but the hurt still clung to him. "You made me think you were my dad." Richard's chest ached. His eyes filled. He leaned forward, his voice cracking. "I wanted to be more than you know, but I didn't want to steal that place in your heart with a lie. I wanted to earn it, to deserve it, and I failed." For the first time, Adam's tears spilled again. But this time, they weren't filled with anger. They were filled with confusion, longing, and a fragile hope. Richard slowly reached into his pocket. Not for money, not for keys, but for something else. A worn-out little paper. It was Adam's drawing, the one of them playing soccer. "I kept this," Richard whispered, his hand shaking as he unfolded it. "Every day, every night. Because to me, this is more valuable than all the gold and cars in the world. Because it's you. Because it's us." Adam's small hands trembled as he took the paper back, staring at the crayon colors, at the smiling stick figures. His tears blurred the lines. He looked up at Richard, voice breaking into a whisper. "You really mean that?" Richard nodded, his face wet now too. "Adam, if you never forgive me, I'll understand. But if you let me, I promise I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm not just another rich man. I'm someone who loves you. Someone who would give it all up just to hear you call me dad again." The silence that followed felt endless. Then, slowly, Adam's little body moved forward. He walked across the room, his footsteps shaky, until he stood right in front of Richard. His lip quivered, his tiny hands clutching the drawing. And then he dropped it, just so his arms could wrap around Richard's neck. Richard froze. Then he pulled the boy in, holding him tight, his body shaking with relief, with love, with everything even holding back. "I'm sorry," Adam whispered against his shoulder. "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean what I said." Richard closed his eyes, tears streaming freely now. "And I'm sorry I made you doubt me. I'll never hide from you again. Never." The mother, standing quietly in the doorway, pressed a hand to her lips. Her eyes softened as she watched the man who once seemed unreachable, untouchable, finally stripped of everything but love. That night, a bond was rebuilt, stronger than before. Because sometimes It's in the breaking that we discover how deeply something matters. The days that follow were different, not in a loud, obvious way, but in the quiet details. For the first time, Adam ran to the park not with anger or confusion in his chest, but with excitement. And Richard? He was already there, waiting, not in a suit, not as a billionaire, but in a simple shirt, sleeves rolled, hair a little messy from the wind. When Adam spotted him, he didn't hesitate. He didn't slow down. He just sprinted, arms open, and Richard knelt, ready to catch him, ready to hold him, ready to begin again. That embrace wasn't just a hug. It was a silent agreement, a promise that no more masks, no more lies, no more walls would ever stand between them. And so a new rhythm began. Richard no longer stayed in boardrooms until midnight. Instead, he rushed out the door with a smile, his chauffeur waiting outside not to take him to a gala, but to a playground. His assistants whisper about the change, puzzled by their boss's sudden obsession with soccer balls and crayons. But Richard didn't care, because for the first time in years, he had a reason to live for something beyond his empire. On weekends, their bond deepened. Richard would take Adam and his mother out, not to lavish restaurants or glittering halls, but to simple places, a small diner where they shared pancakes dripping with syrup, a local bookstore where Adam's eyes lit up at the sight of adventure novels, and quiet walks by the lake, where laughter carried louder than the wind. There were no expensive gifts. Instead, Richard gave what mattered more, time. And Adam returned it with something Richard thought he could never earn again, trust. One evening, after an afternoon of soccer in the park, Adam tugged at Richard's hand. "Do you want to see my room?" he asked shyly. It was a small space, posters of superheroes on the wall, a few worn-out toys stacked in the corner, and right on the nightstand, the crayon drawing Richard had once held so tightly. When Richard saw it, framed now in a little wooden border, his throat tightened. He realized this child had already made a place for him, a place no amount of money could ever buy. Adam sat on the bed, swinging his legs, then looked up. "You know, I don't care if you're rich. I just want you to stay." Richard knelt down, eye level with him, and whispered, "I will, for as long as you'll have me, Adam. I'll stay." The boy's eyes softened. For the first time, the words slipped from his lips, fragile yet strong. "Dad." Richard froze. The world seemed to stop. His heart, hardened by years of loneliness, broke wide open. And in that single word, every wall he had ever built came crashing down. From that night on, everything changed. Richard didn't just visit. He became part of their little family. He learned how to make breakfast, even if his eggs were always a little too runny. He helped Adam with homework, fumbling over math problems that once seemed easy, but now made him laugh when Adam corrected him. And Adam's mother? Slowly, cautiously, she began to see a man she never thought possible. Not the billionaire the world whispered about, but a man who knelt to tie her son's shoes, who carried groceries without being asked, who smiled not with polished charm, but with genuine warmth. One evening, as the three of them sat on the couch watching an old movie, Adam fell asleep, his head resting on Richard's lap. Richard brushed a strand of hair from the boy's forehead and looked up at his mother. For a moment, there was silence, only the flicker of the TV light on their faces. "He deserves stability," Richard said quietly. "He deserves more than someone who shows up and disappears. I want to be here, every day, not as a visitor, as family." Her eyes searched his, cautious but soft. She had seen his change, felt it, but trust once broken doesn't rebuild overnight. Yet when she saw the way Richard's hand gently rested on Adam's small shoulder, the way his gaze softened every time he looked at the boy, something inside her shifted. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a billionaire playing savior. Maybe this was a man who had found what he didn't know he'd been searching for all along. And so, a new chapter unfolded, not one written in wealth or power, but in laughter, shared meals, bedtime stories, and the warmth of belonging. Because sometimes the greatest fortune isn't measured in gold or titles. It's found in the fragile trust of a child, the quiet acceptance of a mother, and the courage to live not for oneself but for love. and Richard had finally found it. Sometimes life has a way of surprising us, not with the things we think we want, but with the things we didn't even know we needed. Richard spent years believing his empire was his greatest achievement. The skyscrapers that bore his name, the luxury cars in his garages, the bank accounts overflowing with wealth. To the world, he was untouchable, powerful, successful beyond imagination. But deep inside, he was alone in rooms too big, at dinners too quiet, and in a life too polished to ever feel real. And then came Adam, not with money, not with status, but with crayons, with questions, with a laugh so genuine it cracked open every wall Richard had built around his heart. Think about it. How many of us chase after the big things? The promotion, the house, the recognition, the applause. We tell ourselves, when I have that, then I'll be happy. But what if true happiness isn't hidden in the extraordinary, but in the simple? A child running into your arms, a shared meal at a worn-down diner, the sound of laughter echoing across a park at sunset. Richard's greatest fortune wasn't in the billions he had accumulated. It was in the quiet trust of a boy who finally whispered, "Dad." And that's the beauty of life, isn't it? The things that truly matter are often the things money can't buy. Love, trust, belonging, the kind of connection that heals wounds no wealth ever could. It makes you wonder, how many moments are we missing while chasing what doesn't last? How many smiles, how many embraces, how many ordinary little miracles slip by? Because we're too busy looking at the wrong prize. Richard's story reminds us of something powerful. No matter how far we drift, no matter how much time is lost, love always gives us another chance. But only if we're brave enough to take it. And maybe that's the message for us too. To stop waiting, to stop assuming we'll have more time, and to start choosing the people right in front of us before the moment slips away. Because in the end, it isn't about what you build or what you own. It's about who you share it with. It's about being there, in the mess, in the laughter, in the ordinary. It's about showing up again and again, even when it's hard. And if we can do that, if we can love fully, live presently, and choose people over possessions, then maybe, just maybe, we'll find that we were rich all along. So tonight, as you sit with this story, ask yourself, who matters most in your life right now? And are you giving them the time, the love, the presence they deserve? Because sometimes all it takes is one decision, one act of courage, to turn a lonely empire into a life worth living. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales TV. Because here, we believe the best stories aren't about riches or fame. They're about love, humanity, and the little moments that remind us what truly matters.